Now, I have made it clear in previous videos that I'm not the biggest fan of modern Tales. From the hit and miss nature of the most recent entries to the long wait time between them, the series has definitely fallen off a bit since the heights it reached in the late noughties. However, there is one game in this modern era which defies this trend and not only stands above other entries of its time, but may be one of the best entries in the series. I am of course talking about none other than 2016's Tales of Berseria. Now just a reminder that this Tales of Berseria retrospective is brought to you by my lovely patrons like Cameron Strauss and Echolocation. For as little as $3 a month you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content, link in the description below. Following the release of Tales of Zesteria, things were not great at Bandai Namco. Fan feedback to Zesteria had been quite negative due to the controversies of that game, and as a result, Hideo Baba had backed away from the producing role, instead moving over to a general supervision role as he prepared to leave Bandai Namco. As a result, the next Tales game would be produced by Yasuhiro Fukuya, a lesser known member of Bandai Namco who had previously worked on quality control across a handful of titles. This made the upcoming Tales game the first mainline game in the series not to have been produced by Baba since 2008's Tales of Zesteria. With Fukuya now in charge of the Tales team, he would immediately get to work developing the next Tales game. With Zesteria leaving a bad taste in the mouth of several Tales fans, it was greatly desired that this next Tales game should launch as soon as possible in order to get disheartened fans back on board. Thus the team would take inspiration from Tales of Zesteria 2 and would recycle the world and presentation from the previous game in order to cut down on development time. However, wanting to distance this new game from Zesteria, the team would also take a page from the Symphonia playbook and set the new game 1,000 years before the events of Zesteria. Writing this prequel plot would once again fall to series veteran Naoki Yamamoto, who was interested in contrasting this new game with the previous Tales of Zesteria. In Zesteria, the player had taken the role of a shepherd who would seek out and destroy the Lord of Calamity. Thus Yamamoto decided on flipping the script to instead see the player to take on the role as the Lord of Calamity, seeking out and destroying the shepherd. Yamamoto also decided to flip the gender of the main protagonist to a female named Velvet Crow, after seeing the positive fan feedback to Mila in Tales of Zesteria. This would make Berseria the first, and as of now only, mainline Tales game with a solo female lead. Designing Velvet would fall to series veteran Mutsumi Namata, who would be joined alongside other veterans like Kosuke Fujishima and Daigo Okamura. Ufotable would also return to develop the anime cutscenes. With the game basically reusing Zesteria's assets, the team decided to once again release the game on the now decade-old PlayStation 3. However, this time the PlayStation 4 and PC versions would be developed in tandem, rather than afterwards. This in respect made Berseria the last 7th generation Tales game, ending Tales' biggest console generation with a whopping 10 mainline titles released along with a bunch more spin-off games. The story quickly developed into a plot surrounding a rage-filled Velvet seeking out the shepherd in an attempt to get revenge for the loss of her brother. Throughout the plot, Velvet would blow through obstacles after obstacles in order to get her revenge, much like the Norse berserker warriors of Dark Age Europe. Thus the team would settle on the name of Tales of Berseria. Alongside the revenge plot, the team also developed an interest in the philosophical concepts of will versus reason, with Velvet being driven by emotion, while the antagonist would be driven by hard logic. This philosophical debate would also be reflected in the game's characteristic genre of RPG of discovering your own reason to live. Bandai Namco would reveal Tales of Berseria in June of 2015, 5 months after the launch of Tales of Zesteria in Japan and a few months before Zesteria's launch in the West. To help promote the game, a handful of episodes in the concurrent anime Tales of Zesteria the X would be focused on events in Tales of Berseria. Both PS3 and PS4 versions of Tales of Berseria would release in Japan on the 18th of August 2016, while North America would get the game on the 24th of January 2017. PAL regions would get the game 3 days later on the 27th, alongside the worldwide release of the PC version on Steam. Shortly before the Western release, it was revealed that a key moment near the start of the game had been changed to meet age rating requirements. This caused quite a stir in the English-speaking Tales community, leading Bandai Namco America to later post an apology for the change. The story begins on a scarlet night as we see the siblings of Velvet and Laphicet Crow being led by their older brother-in-law Arturius Colbrande as they flee a town overrun by demons. Arturius attempts to hide the two children while he goes off to find his wife Celica. Velvet and Laphicet attempt to hide but are spotted by a demon. As a result, the two run after Arturius only to find him at an altar with an impaled body hovering above it. The whole flashback then turns out to be a dream by Velvet, who is now a demon herself. Velvet now rots in the bowels of the dungeon island of Titania, where she has fed other demons which she consumes using her demonic claw hand. As she consumes another demon, she reflects on how she got into this position. Jumping back 3 years, Velvet lives in the small village of Abol with Laphicet, who is very sick. Arturius pops by from time to visit, but is often out fighting demons threatening the people around the world. As a result, Velvet has grown into a strong independent big sister in order to look after Laphicet. She frequently heads out in the forest to hunt boars to sell the meat for money. However, she ends up biting off more than she can chew when she gets into a fight with a herd of boars. Luckily, Arturius had recently returned to town and using his superior skills kills the boars. When Velvet asks Arturius if she can be as good as him, Arturius responds with a philosophical question about why birds fly, to which Velvet struggles to answer. Heading back to town, Arturius once again heads off on another quest, leaving Velvet and Laphicet behind once again. Back at home, Velvet reflects over dinner on how tomorrow is the 7-year anniversary of Celica's death, on that horrible scarlet night. The next day, Velvet is shocked to find Laphicet missing. Heading into the woods, she finds him on the way to the nearby cape to pick flowers for Celica's grave. At the cape, the two see the altar where Celica died 7 years ago. While reflecting on past events, the two are then attacked by a demon. While Velvet tries her best, she is unable to hurt the creature. Luckily, Arturius once again shows up and saves the day, however Velvet is exhausted and passes out. When Velvet awakens again, it is another scarlet night and Laphicet is once again missing. Leaving the house, Velvet is horrified to see the town overrun by demons. Fleeing town and heading to the cape, Velvet finds Laphicet by the altar with Arturius. To her horror, Arturius magically binds Velvet and then proceeds to stab Laphicet before casting him into the pit in the middle of the altar. Breaking her binds, Velvet dives into the pit in an attempt to save Laphicet, but instead gets her arm cut off, resulting in her too falling into the pit. Inside the pit, she sees Laphicet get devoured by a dragon creature before she is spat out of the altar, now reborn as a Therian, a special demon which eats other demons. Using her now demonic claw, Velvet attempts to kill Arturius, but is knocked out by Arturius' mullet companion Ceres, and is later dragged away to the prison island of Titania, bringing us back to the present day. Velvet continues to rot in prison when she receives a surprise visit from Ceres. Ceres claims that she no longer serves Arturius and offers to help Velvet escape. While Velvet is at first reluctant to take Ceres' help, she eventually offers to take it so she can escape and hunt down Arturius. Soon after escaping her cell, Velvet decides to release all the other inmates in order to create chaos and hide her escape. In doing so, she releases another demon named Rokuro Rangetsu, as well as a witch named Mazagikika Milundin Dor Din Nolurin Dor, or just Margilu. While Rokuro and Margilu run off on their own activities, Velvet and Ceres make their way to the dock to escape on a ship. At the dock, the two run into Praetor Oscar Dragona, who just unfortunately so happened to be visiting the island when the breakout happened. Velvet and Ceres attempt to fight Oscar, however Ceres is mortally wounded. Hoping for her life not to go to waste, Ceres requests that Velvet consume her and use her power to escape. Despite not initially caring for Ceres, Velvet is reluctant to consume her, but left with no other choice honours her request. Now with the power of Ceres inside her, Velvet proceeds to blast a fireball into Oscar's face, taking out one of his eyes. While Oscar cries out in pain, Rokuro and Margilu show up after getting lost running around the island. Seeing that Velvet is about to escape on Oscar's boat, the two decide to join Velvet in escaping the island. And the story continues from there as the three travel across the continent in search of Arturius, as well as any powerful tools they can use to take him down. For the full story breakdown, there appears to be a handful of videos which dive into the plot, but I cannot say if they cover the whole story, so also check out cutscene compilations as well. Being heavily built off Tales of Zesteria's assets, Tales of Berseria presents almost identical in the same way that Xillia 2 presented very similar to Xillia 1. Despite presenting almost identical to Zesteria, Berseria does have several notable differences, which ironically are mostly downgrades. For one, the maps have been notably scaled back in size and segmented once again, thankfully not as bad as Xillia, although some dungeons can get very repetitive. Alongside the smaller maps, we also no longer have other party members travelling with us. While these cutbacks are unfortunate, they thankfully do not take away too much from the overall presentation, and Berseria does make up its presentation in other areas. For a start, battles have once again returned back to separate battle arenas like in past games. As a result, fields and dungeons are no longer giant wide open spaces of nothing and actually have some decent detail. Interestingly, rather than being one singular continent, Berseria's world is made up of several smaller continents, thus the player will need to sail between the different continents via the pirate ship Van Eltia. Along with the Van Eltia, the party can also use a secondary ship to explore the continents beyond the realms of the main game. This works in a similar manner to the cat fetch system from Xillia 2, in which you will dispatch the scout ship for a while, which will then later return with a bunch of treasure. What is also cool about these discoverable continents is the fact that each is themed to a past Tales game, with the treasure often referencing those games. Getting back to the plot, throughout the story you will explore the world of Zesteria 1,000 years in the past. While a lot of locations are quite different from those seen in Zesteria, a handful of familiar landmarks do appear. Although get used to several name changes, not least of which is Seraphim now being referred to as Malachim. Exploring these maps, you'll find that they are littered with these balls called soul orbs. These special orbs end up working like a currency used to open special cat's treasure chests, which often reward the party with cosmetic gear, which we can then use to ruin the game's cutscenes. To help pick up all these orbs, as well as navigate the maps, the party will eventually unlock the geoboard, which works almost identical to how Neusch worked in Tales of Symphonia, with the party first needing to find a landmark in the region before being able to fast travel. However, unlike Neusch, the geoboard can also be used to jump gaps, allowing the party to find shortcuts as well as hidden areas. As you explore these maps, be sure to look out for Code Red demons. These powerful demons are spread across the land and will net your party a great bounty if they are defeated. Alongside the bounty, these demons also drop Ventatite, which gives the party a range of bonuses from increased movement speed to whole new battle mechanics. They also help in unlocking item skills, which return in a similar format to Berseria, in which characters can once again learn new skills off their equipped items. Getting away from Code Red demons and weapon skills, we also have the return of minigames. While minigames had been present in most previous games, Berseria arguably brings us the largest selection of minigames since Eternia. From target combat tests to long jumps, Berseria has a bunch of side activities to choose from. My personal favourite has to be the Hunt of Food, a card game that uses the previous game's characters as cards. Going over to the characters themselves, joining Velvet, Rokuro and Margilu on their quest of revenge, we have Aizen, Edna's older brother, who is less draconic looking than his previous appearance in Zesteria. Along with Aizen returning, we also have Zavid, who appears as a non-playable character several times throughout the story. Going over to the more playable characters, we also have Malak No. 2, who Velvet later names Luffyset due to his similar appearance to her younger brother. We also have Eleanor Hume, an exorcist who ends up defecting to your group due to complications with the church. Finally, we also have Bienfu, Margilu's perverted Norman companion, who, while technically not playable, gives Margilu the power to use her spells. Bienfu isn't the only unofficial party member, as we have a bunch of side characters who in effect feel like party members, such as Dao and Benwick, who help ferry the party around the world. Alongside a bunch of reoccurring allies, we also have a bunch of reoccurring villains too. Supporting Arturius are his 4 top ranked exorcists of Oscar, Teresa, Shigure and Melchior, who all make frequent appearances throughout the plot trying to stop your schemes. Speaking about schemes, arguably one of the coolest parts of Tales of Berseria's plot is the fact that in some respects you are playing as the villains. As a party, you frequently find yourselves being the one making the villainous schemes instead of being the one trying to stop them. In fact, before joining your party, Eleanor always comes across as the hero trying to stop you right when you're about to pull off your scheme. If I haven't made it clear enough, I love this game's story and characters. Its narrative is near perfect, and that includes its length and skits. Berseria really takes the classic skits to a whole new level in the presentation department. Rather than just having characters stand side by side and chatting, Berseria instead jumps between frames in which we'll see the characters both in close-up and wide shots. We even get special character poses when the skit requires it. In general, skits have never looked better, and this is in part why I don't particularly mind their longer lengths. I also don't mind that a couple of the skits also replace more dialogue-heavy cutscenes, and arguably they are a more visually expressive alternative than watching the 3D models mouth off some dialogue lines. For combat, Tales of Berseria uses the Liberation linear motion battle system, although calling it a linear motion battle system is kinda stretching it. For the first time in the series, we now have free run as the default movement system, rather than it being activated by holding a trigger. This has resulted in several knock-on effects which drastically change the previous control schemes. Guarding for one is no longer located on square, instead being moved to the L1 button. While now on a different button, you can still perform Grace's style front, back and sidestepping, thus giving us a little bit of that classic linear motion combat. Alongside guarding, the menu command has also been kicked off triangle, with it now instead using the PS4 touchpad. As a result, the face button's now being freed up for attacks. Yes, for the first time in the series, the face buttons are now all attacks. Like in Grace's and Zesteria, we once again have an art tree, however its implementation is very different from the past games. For a start, each of the 4 rows now corresponds to one of the 4 face buttons, instead of a stick input. You can now also customize these arts to create your own combos. While this freedom is nice, it does somewhat incentivize you to put all your effective arts on one button and spam it. In general, Berseria, like Hearts, is a very spammy Tales game, with arguably having a very basic control scheme, along with party members who hit very hard. However, the game does have a few tricks to prevent you from entirely steamrolling your enemies. Like most other modern entries, Berseria has a CC gauge. In this game, CC is called souls, and initially you will have 3 at the start of battle. Souls come in 2 parts, a blue diamond and a white outline. The white outline works in a very similar way to AC from the Zesteria games, in which each attack will consume one of them, and at the conclusion of a combo they recharge immediately. Meanwhile, the blue diamonds work more like Destiny 2's Spirit gauge, in which its depletions depend on the art's SG cost. They will also not fill up immediately and will need time to recharge. While you start the battle with 3 souls, you can gain and lose souls both before and during combat. Before combat, if you trigger an advantage encounter, you will start with 4 souls. Meanwhile, if you get a risky encounter, you will start with 2. In combat, souls can be gained by applying status ailments or killing enemies. You can also be lost if you get hit by a status ailment or die. If you're facing an enemy who is really hard to apply status ailments to, you can also gain souls by perfect dodging attacks, although this soul will be flung out into space for any party member to pick up. If you have more than 3 souls, you are able to perform break souls. These are special character actions which cost 1 soul. When activated, a break soul will reset your soul gauge, allowing you to continue combos. They also refill the battle gauge, which makes its return from Zesteria. BG is predominantly used for 2 actions, Mystic Arts and Switch Blasts. When in combat, your bench party members will be displayed above and below your active party members. At any time in combat, at the cost of 1 BG, you can use the D-pad to switch an active party member with a benched one. The benched member will enter combat via a powerful Switch Blast attack, which will always gain them as soul. The result of Switch Blast is a battle system that allows one to carry combos between party members in a way we really haven't seen since Tales of Innocence. Heck, we can even combo Mystic Arts together in this game. Going over to talk about the characters specifically, we have Velvet, who might possibly hold the record for being the most overpowered character of all time. Using a gauntlet sword, Velvet's attacks predominantly consist of slashes combined with aerobatic flips and twists. For her break soul, Velvet has Consuming Claw, in which she will use her demonic arm to slash at the enemy, with her gaining a buff depending on the enemy slashed. Following this attack, Velvet will remain in this Therianized state in which she will have increased strength and be unable to flinch, however her health will continue to deteriorate. Despite losing health, Velvet cannot die while Therianized, with her health eventually capping at 1 and reverting her back to normal. If Velvet runs out of souls, she will perform a powerful finishing attack and return back to her normal state. Since her break soul can so easily gain additional souls, it is very easy to almost permanently remain Therianized and thus invincible, making Velvet one broken character. If you actually want a challenge in the game, you can try out Rokuro. Despite having a giant sword in his back, Rokuro doesn't use it outside of some late game attacks. Instead, he relies on a pair of short daggers. While a rapid attacker, Rokuro is not as athletic as Velvet and will need to get in closer to hit enemies. This however plays to his break soul of Vengeful Stance, which puts him into a counter state in which any attack made on him will be negated, and instead Rokuro will counterattack. Laphicet is kind of the party healer with access to a bunch of healing spells. However, for the most part he fights using paper charms which come in both physical and elemental forms. For his break soul, Laphicet has Divide Pain, which is an arena-wide buff. While active, all party members will receive half damage and will slowly heal, making Laphicet a great companion for long boss fights. As the other Malik in the group, Aizen has similar combat abilities to Laphicet, such as casting spells. However, he is much more of a physical fighter, using his fists over any kind of magical charm. If Aizen's target is stunned or knocked down, he can use his break soul of Draconic Drive, in which, totally not a foreshadow, Aizen will take on a draconic form and blast into the stunned enemy for large damage. Magilu fills in as the primary caster of the group, using similar paper charms to the Luffy set called Guardians. For the most part, she uses fire and water based arts and spells, with a couple of healing spells as well. For her break soul, Magilu uses Spell Absorber, which will interrupt any casting enemy and absorb their spells. When Magilu absorbs enough spells, she'll unleash a powerful random counterspell at the enemy. Finally finishing up, we have Eleanor, who like Magilu is a Malik empowered human with casting abilities. Although, like Aizen, she tends to focus on her physical attacks over magic. Using a spear, Eleanor, like Velvet, is able to perform sweep and thrusting attacks at range. For her break soul, Eleanor uses Aerial Strike, which throws a targeted enemy up into the air, thus breaking their guard and allowing Eleanor to combo into them. Like practically all previous games, Motoi Sakuraba returns to compose the game's score, although this time he's not joined by Go Shina, although Shina's theme for Zavi does make a return. With Sakuraba once again working solo, we have a much more consistent soundtrack than last time, and I must say there are some pretty good tracks here. Obviously you have the battle themes like Shout Your Soul and my personal favourite of Demon Assault, however we also have some individual themes for each of the main characters like Rokuro's Oriental Rock Beat and Magilu's mischievous Big Band Romp, but quite frankly none of them hold a candle to Velvet's theme. My goodness, where do I even begin with this piece? Velvet's theme in my opinion is the greatest track Sakuraba has ever composed for a video game. I love how tragic the piece sounds at the start before it builds into an epic theme of triumph. I also like how the game purposely hides the latter part of Velvet's theme throughout the early game by ending cutscenes before the theme gets to the triumphant part. As a result, when it finally does get to the full theme, I can't help but get pumped to see Velvet's mission through to the end. While Berseria might not have my favourite soundtrack overall, it does have one incredible piece. Now I've gushed about the soundtrack, but I also have to talk about the voice actors too. Christina V is an incredible Velvet, being able to effortlessly switch between Velvet's innocent childhood voice lines and her gruff demonic lines. However, V is not the only incredible performance. You know, I think I take back calling Yuri the best troll character in the series because I completely forgot about how hilarious Magilu is.
True enough. If forward lies destruction and backward lies doom, sideways is your only option!
You think a game about a woman hunting down her brother's killer has no place for comic relief like Magilu, but somehow the geniuses at Bandai Namco pulled it off, and not just with Magilu, as the whole cast, Velvet included, are somehow able to be the funniest people on earth while at the same time keeping me concerned about their dark struggles. Alright, I think I've praised the music and voice actors enough, let's get to the opening. For the game's opening song, we have Flo, who had previously done the opening theme to Tales of Zesteria the X. For this game we have the song Burn, which gives us our first real solid rock song since I guess Tales of the Tempest. As for the opening, you know, it's getting kinda hard to say which of these UFO table openings I like the best because they're all really great. Although, in this case, I do take issue with how much the OP makes it look like the game is predominantly set on the Van Eltia, when in reality the ship portions of the game are actually quite minimal. But hey, it's still a really good opening. You know, I've always said that when it comes to a game, gameplay reigns supreme over things like story and characters. Like, if you're a person who puts story above gameplay, you may as well just watch a movie. However, Tales of Berseria really tests me on that philosophy. For a story, Berseria has arguably the perfect plot, as there's literally nothing I can criticise in it. It sticks to its themes of will versus reason perfectly, and the main characters each play their respective role to a fault. While I normally consider the Xeno games as the pinnacle of JRPG storytelling, even I can acknowledge that they frequently get bogged down in sci-fi mumbo-jumbo. Berseria shows you don't really need all that world building to deliver a great story, and in some respects I put Berseria's plot above a lot of those from the Xeno series. Not only is the story great, but so too are the characters. Whoever is responsible for this game's English voice cast deserves a gold medal, because outside a couple of side characters, it's a perfect voice cast. It's thanks to this voice cast that I fell in love with each of the party members to a point that a list of my favourite Tales party members would basically be the 6 Berseria party members before I even got to another game's character. Alongside arguably the best cast in any Tales game, Berseria also has arguably the best side cast as well. Both villains and allies make frequent regular appearances throughout the game. This allows us to really get to know them in a way most other Tales games do not. From Melchior to Benwick, I can't think of another Tales game with such a well developed side cast. So it's with great annoyance that I have to talk about the combat system. Like, what happened here? Graces and Zesteria 2 had some of the best battle systems in the series, and while not perfect, Zesteria's battle system was alright. However, Berseria gives us one of the series' weakest battle systems. For a start, it's way too easy to pummel enemies into the ground, especially if you play as Velvet in a nigh immortal Therian form. The fact that in fights you can just dump all your super effective arts to one button and spam it removes basically any challenge of button timing and inputs. Battles are also extremely luck based, with its soul system requiring you to get lucky with landing status effects on enemies and vice versa. With that being said, Berseria's combat isn't a total write-off. Despite being easy, it's not like I didn't die to the occasional boss fight due to being too reckless. And obviously, there is a power fantasy aspect to being an unstoppable demon on a quest for revenge. I have to admit, chaining 6 mystic arts into a helpless boss is quite fun to watch, so I guess there is fun to have in this battle system, even if I wish it had a bit more of a challenge. One final thing I want to mention about this game that I often feel like doesn't get talked about much by fans is how much it homages past entries. While Tales has always referenced itself from going right back to Destiny on the PS1, I really like how Berseria goes the extra mile. Not only does Berseria reference previous entries in place names and minigames, but also in its gameplay. As I have alluded to throughout this video, Berseria's gameplay in some respects is a mix of past games' ideas merged into one game, which I, as a fan of the series, found really cool. So where do I rank Berseria in the wider Tales series? I admit, this does challenge me to admit that a good story can save a game with mediocre combat, as Berseria is arguably a top 3 Tales game alongside Tales of Zesteria and Tales of Zesteria, even with its flaws. While I think the gameplay keeps it from the top spot, I cannot rank this game any lower on my list. If Berseria was supposed to be an apology for Zesteria, I can quite confidently say that it was an apology well accepted by me, and I suspect a lot of fans too. However, there was a dark side to Berseria's success. With a darker story and simplistic combat system being popular, Bandai Namco would double down on these features for their next game, which is what we'll be talking about next time. Yes, the time has finally come for me to face my nemesis, the game I always knew I'd have to come back to after walking away in disappointment back in 2021. Now 2 years later, I will drag myself back to this game in an attempt to see if I can find out why so many people love it. So join me next time as I finally finish up this Tales retrospective with 2021's Tales of Arise for the PlayStation 4.